No snacks for you." The voice of the flight attendant cut through the cabin like a whip, and 7-year-old Ethan Johnson froze, gripping the frayed strap of his backpack, his small body pressed against the edge of the aisle seat. His dark brown eyes, wide but steady, scanned the polished rows of leather seats, catching the curious glances of passengers, whispers floating over the hum of the engines. The smell of coffee and pretzels mingled with recycled air as Ethan remained calm, his chin lifted slightly, refusing to let anger take hold, though a faint tremble ran through his fingers. Megan Parker, the attendant, stood rigid, arms crossed, her sharp eyes narrowing as she regarded him, unaware of the secret woven into his very identity. Ethan's gaze drifted to the small window, watching clouds pass in slow motion, a silent heartbeat of the world outside. He shifted slightly, reaching into his backpack and pulling out a tattered notebook, flipping it open, sketching quick lines of airplanes, cityscapes, and tiny details of flight, the motion deliberate and grounding. The cabin seemed to shrink around him as murmurs swelled among passengers, a mix of confusion and quiet sympathy, yet he held his place, dignity intact. In that moment, a subtle vibration ran through the cabin floor as the private door at the front hissed open, footsteps resonating like a drumbeat on polished linoleum. Richard Johnson, tall, impeccably dressed, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses, entered, scanning the cabin until they locked onto Ethan, whose eyes widened for just a heartbeat before settling into the same calm determination. Megan blinked, mouth slightly ajar, her frown softening as recognition dawned, the tension in her shoulders releasing as the truth struck like sunlight through storm clouds. Richard approached, kneeling slightly to meet Ethan at eye level, the polished metal of the service cart glinting off the overhead lights, a gentle hand resting on the boy's shoulder, reassuring and protective. Ethan exhaled softly, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his lips, a quiet acknowledgement of safety, while passengers leaned forward, captivated by the unexpected turn of events, the cabin alive with held breaths and unsaid amazement. Outside, the plane hummed steadily, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding within, clouds drifting past in bands of gold and gray, sunlight refracting through the oval windows, illuminating the small but courageous figure of Ethan as he shifted slightly, eyes meeting his father's with a connection deeper than words. Megan Parker stepped back, shoulders loosening, finally extending a tray with a small sandwich and juice, her expression a mix of relief and newfound respect, while Ethan reached forward, nodding politely, his composure unwavering, dignity intact, a subtle statement in a world often too quick to judge. The camera of imagination captures the moment, frozen yet alive, as Ethan lifts the sandwich carefully, glancing at Richard before turning his attention to the cabin, the hum of engines punctuating a quiet victory, a silent promise that courage and dignity can reshape even the most rigid walls, leaving the passengers and viewers alike suspended in anticipation of what will come next, knowing this small act will ripple far beyond the aisle of this single plane. Ethan Johnson sat quietly, taking small, deliberate bites of his sandwich while the hum of the plane settled into a steady rhythm, the sunlight streaming through the oval windows casting soft patterns on the polished leather seats around him. Richard Johnson remained kneeling beside him, a calm presence, his hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, eyes scanning the cabin to ensure no tension lingered. Passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring quietly, some leaning forward to witness the unlikely scene of a small boy maintaining dignity in the midst of a moment that could have unraveled anyone else. Megan Parker lingered nearby, her arms uncrossed now, holding a tray with additional snacks, her expression softened, eyes flicking between Ethan and Richard as if trying to reconcile her previous reaction with the truth she had just realized. Ethan glanced up at his father and offered a small, polite smile, the kind that spoke of understanding and gratitude without the need for words, a bridge between their two worlds that had been silently forming from the moment Richard had entered the cabin. The boy's backpack rested at his feet, worn fabric bunched against the polished aisle, and he carefully adjusted the straps, a subtle reminder of his independence, his self-reliance evident in every measured movement. Richard leaned back slightly, allowing Ethan a moment of space, observing the passengers as they returned to their seats, whispers of admiration mixing with the soft murmur of the air conditioning and the faint clatter of cups from the galley. Ethan reached into his backpack, pulling out a small notebook, and began to sketch quietly. Lines forming airplanes and cities, his focus unwavering, a meditative act that kept him grounded amidst the extraordinary events unfolding around him. Megan, now more composed, crouched briefly to adjust a fallen napkin from the floor, glancing at Ethan with a newfound respect, recognizing the quiet strength he carried in his small frame. Outside, the clouds drifted lazily past, light shifting in gentle waves across the cabin, and for a brief moment, the plane felt like a suspended world, the tension diffused into calm understanding. Richard whispered softly, almost inaudibly, something that made Ethan tilt his head and nod, a silent exchange of trust and reassurance, a connection deeper than any conversation could express. The other passengers, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to settle, some smiling quietly, the cabin now filled with a sense of respect, empathy, and relief, their eyes occasionally flicking toward the boy who had transformed a moment of conflict into one of dignity. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his posture, eyes sweeping the cabin with a quiet confidence, a small gesture that held weight far beyond his years, signaling that he was not only present but fully aware of the impact of the moment. Richard continued to remain close, his presence protective yet unobtrusive, allowing Ethan the space to carry himself with grace, a balance of authority and gentle oversight that reinforced the lesson in empathy and respect already evident in the boy's demeanor. The subtle whir of the plane's engines, the soft rustle of seatbelts and overhead compartments, and the filtered sunlight created an almost cinematic tableau. The quiet tension transformed into a tableau of calm resolution, anticipation, and the unspoken promise of what might unfold next once the flight continued beyond the horizon. Ethan Johnson finished his small meal, carefully placing the empty wrapper back into his backpack, his movements deliberate and composed as if each action were a statement of self-respect and quiet strength. Richard Johnson remained close, his hand still resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, the subtle warmth a reminder of safety and trust in the midst of a cabin that had shifted from tension to attentive curiosity. Megan Parker hovered nearby, her posture softened, the lines of frustration around her eyes easing as she observed the boy's calm demeanor, realizing the lesson unfolding before her about dignity and respect. Passengers began to glance toward the aisle sporadically, some exchanging hushed whispers, all noticing the small figure of Ethan who carried himself with an unspoken authority, a reminder that courage and integrity do not come with age or size. The sunlight outside shifted subtly, brushing across the polished leather seats and glinting off the metal edges of the service carts, painting the cabin in a warm, almost cinematic glow that highlighted every small movement, every careful gesture, and every exchanged glance. Ethan's dark brown eyes met those of a young girl seated a few rows ahead, her small face reflecting awe and quiet admiration as he offered a subtle nod, acknowledging her presence without words, a silent bond forming across the aisle. Richard followed Ethan's gaze, recognizing the connection and feeling a swell of pride and protective instinct, his body language gentle yet commanding as he subtly guided attention away from any lingering tension. Megan adjusted her position to stand near the exit of the galley, observing the interactions, her hands unconsciously smoothing her uniform as she reflected on the earlier misunderstanding and the quiet dignity Ethan had maintained despite it all. The hum of the engines provided a constant backdrop, the rhythmic vibration beneath the feet of seated passengers lending a subtle cadence to the unfolding calm, while the occasional clink of utensils and muted coughs created small punctuations in the soundscape that emphasized the stillness of the moment. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, opening his small notebook once again and sketching lines that mirrored the airplane outside the window, the clouds drifting past in endless motion, and his pencil movements precise and steady, a mirror to his unwavering composure. Richard bent slightly to glance at the drawings, a soft smile forming as he admired the boy's focus, noticing the delicate details and the care with which he rendered the world beyond the cabin, a glimpse into a mind as observant as it was creative. Passengers' attention continued to waver between Ethan and the unfolding scene, some quietly gesturing to companions, pointing subtly, others simply watching, captivated by the contrast between the boy's calm, high-minded presence and the earlier commotion. Megan's lips pressed together in thought, a realization dawning that this child, though small in stature, held the ability to command attention and respect without raising her voice or demanding recognition. Ethan's gaze finally returned to his father, a slow exhale marking his satisfaction and a subtle acknowledgement of the support and reassurance provided, and Richard nodded slightly, the exchange conveying a shared understanding and mutual respect, a silent communication that bridged any gap of uncertainty or unease. The cabin, now calm and focused, seemed to breathe in unison with the boy, the subtle interplay of light, sound, and gesture creating a tableau that spoke louder than words ever could, the anticipation of what might come next lingering in the gentle rhythm of the airplane as it cut through the sky, leaving passengers quietly captivated by the small boy whose presence had reshaped their perception of courage, empathy, and dignity. Richard Johnson leaned back slightly, letting Ethan Johnson finish his sketches, the boy's small hands moving gracefully over the paper as the pencil traced careful lines of airplanes, clouds, and distant cityscapes, each stroke precise and deliberate, reflecting a mind far beyond his 7 years. The cabin around them remained calm, the hum of the engines a constant undercurrent, punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of a passenger adjusting in their seat or the soft clatter of cups and utensils from the galley. Megan Parker, still standing near the service cart, watched Ethan with a mixture of awe and introspection, realizing that her initial judgment had been rushed, her eyes reflecting the dawning respect for the quiet composure and inherent dignity of the boy. Ethan glanced up at her once, a small, polite nod acknowledging her presence without words, and she felt a subtle shift in herself, a reminder of how small actions can teach larger lessons. Richard's eyes followed Ethan's gaze across the cabin, noticing the subtle interactions of passengers now leaning forward slightly, their whispers replaced by attentive observation, captivated by the unspoken lesson unfolding before them. The sunlight streaming through the oval windows highlighted the contours of Ethan's face and the neat lines of his hair, casting warm patterns across the seat in front of him, and the glinting metal of the overhead bins reflected the soft light, creating an almost cinematic tableau of the quiet moment. Ethan carefully set his notebook aside and adjusted the straps of his backpack, a deliberate gesture of self-sufficiency and poise, his dark brown eyes scanning the cabin with a calm attentiveness that belied the extraordinary circumstances. Richard smiled softly, a hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, a silent affirmation of support and acknowledgement of the courage the boy had shown, the trust between them growing subtly yet profoundly in the shared understanding of this quiet moment. Megan Parker shifted her weight, crossing her arms lightly, the tension in her shoulders easing, her breath softening as she absorbed the scene, recognizing that the moment had transformed the cabin's energy from judgment and tension into mutual respect and quiet admiration. Ethan took a deep, steady breath, his gaze drifting briefly to the window, the clouds moving past in slow, deliberate bands, mirroring the rhythm of the calm now settled within the cabin, and he exhaled softly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Richard followed, observing the shift not only in Ethan but in the passengers, some of whom now offered subtle smiles or nods, acknowledging the boy's poise, the silent power of his presence having diffused the earlier tension. Megan finally stepped forward, offering a tray with water and juice, her hands steady now, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a quiet apology implicit in the gesture, and the boy accepted with a simple, polite, "Thank you," his composure unwavering, dignity intact. The soft light continued to move across the cabin, reflecting on Ethan's small, precise movements as he sipped water, his posture erect, his confidence calm and quiet, commanding attention without words. Richard glanced around, noting how the cabin's atmosphere had transformed entirely, the tension now replaced by attentive observation, whispers replaced by thoughtful silence, each passenger subtly acknowledging the integrity and bravery of the boy before them. Ethan placed the cup back carefully, a small, deliberate gesture, and looked up at his father, eyes bright, meeting Richard's gaze with an unspoken understanding, a connection that conveyed more than words ever could, bridging the distance between authority and childhood innocence in a way that commanded both respect and quiet admiration. Outside, the plane continued its steady course, sunlight glancing across the clouds, the movement of air and light punctuating the calm, a perfect backdrop to the unfolding quiet triumph within the cabin, where dignity, empathy, and subtle courage had reshaped the perceptions of all who witnessed it. As the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm, Ethan Johnson carefully adjusted his seatbelt, his small hands working with deliberate precision, the sunlight shifting across the polished leather and illuminating the soft strands of his hair, casting a gentle glow over his focused expression. Richard Johnson remained close, leaning slightly toward his son, his eyes scanning the passengers with a protective and observant gaze, making subtle adjustments with his body language to ensure the comfort and calm of the boy. Megan Parker moved quietly along the aisle, arranging service trays with measured care, her previous tension replaced by a thoughtful attentiveness, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Ethan as if learning from his composed demeanor. The hum of the engines filled the background, punctuated by soft clinks from the galley and the subtle murmur of passengers settling, creating a steady rhythm that framed the unfolding calm. Ethan reached into his backpack, pulling out the small notebook he had been sketching in earlier, and flipped it open to a fresh page, tracing the outline of the cabin around him, the seats, the overhead bins, even the soft curves of the windows, each line a quiet assertion of presence and observation, a reflection of his awareness and control in a world that often overlooked him. Richard smiled gently, watching his son with a mix of pride and quiet admiration, noting the boy's patience and the calm authority he carried without demanding it, a rare combination that held the attention of the cabin in subtle ways. Passengers glanced up occasionally, their expressions softening, some leaning slightly to observe the interaction, the whispers of curiosity replaced by an almost reverent silence, captivated by the quiet confidence and dignity radiating from the small figure in the seat. Megan paused near the cart, adjusting her posture, taking in the scene, realizing the lesson that unfolded before her was one of humility, respect, and the understated power of composure, her earlier judgment replaced by reflection. Ethan gently set his pencil down, looking up at the cabin with dark brown eyes that conveyed both awareness and reassurance, a silent message that he understood the space and the people around him without needing to speak aloud. Richard nodded softly, acknowledging the silent communication, his hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, a grounding presence that reinforced the boy's quiet strength, while the sunlight through the windows shifted, highlighting the moment in warm tones. The plane hummed steadily, engines vibrating subtly beneath them, and the world outside the oval windows drifted past in streaks of cloud and sunlight, creating a serene contrast to the tension that had filled the cabin moments before. Ethan picked up a small water bottle from the tray table, lifting it carefully, taking measured sips, each action deliberate, reflecting self-respect and careful observation, the passengers watching the poise with quiet fascination. Richard's gaze followed every subtle movement, noting how Ethan's calm had transformed the cabin's energy, the respect and attentiveness of the passengers a testament to the boy's composed and unwavering presence. Megan returned to her duties, softer in her steps, her gestures careful, as if absorbing the lesson silently, and Ethan finally closed his notebook, tucking it carefully into the backpack, a small smile of satisfaction on his face. The cabin now filled with quiet reflection, anticipation, and the unspoken understanding that the events of these moments would ripple beyond the airplane aisle, leaving a lasting impression of dignity, empathy, and subtle courage. Ethan Johnson carefully placed his notebook back into his backpack, the small movements deliberate and precise, reflecting a sense of ownership and calm authority over his own space. The cabin now quieter as the passengers absorbed the subtle transformation that had taken place. Richard Johnson adjusted slightly in his seat beside his son, his hand still resting gently on Ethan's shoulder, eyes scanning the surrounding rows to ensure that every subtle gesture and glance of reassurance was received, a silent affirmation of safety and support. Megan Parker moved toward the front, adjusting the service cart with measured steps, her expression contemplative, her gaze occasionally drifting toward Ethan, as though each detail of his composed presence was a lesson in humility and quiet dignity. The soft hum of the engines filled the cabin, punctuated only by the rustle of seatbelts and the occasional click of a tray table, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the unfolding calm. Ethan shifted slightly, lifting the water bottle he had been sipping from and setting it carefully back onto the tray, his eyes flicking toward a small child across the aisle who had been watching him with wide, curious eyes, and he offered a brief nod, a silent gesture of reassurance and empathy. Richard noticed the subtle interaction, smiling softly, recognizing the boy's ability to command attention and respect without raising his voice or demanding recognition, the quiet power of presence evident in every careful movement and deliberate glance. Megan's shoulders relaxed as she observed the exchange, the previous tension in her stance dissolving into quiet admiration, a realization that patience, respect, and understanding had reshaped not only the atmosphere of the cabin but also her own perception. Passengers adjusted in their seats, leaning forward subtly, whispers fading into attentive observation, their expressions reflecting a mix of wonder and acknowledgement at the quiet courage displayed by Ethan, a reminder of how small acts of composure and integrity can influence those around them. Ethan reached briefly into his backpack once more, retrieving a small drawing he had started on a scrap of paper, the lines precise and thoughtful, depicting the airplane from memory, clouds drifting past the windows, and tiny details of the city below, a reflection of his awareness and calm perspective in the midst of the moving cabin. Richard bent slightly to glance at the sketch, nodding gently, a soft smile acknowledging the focus and care with which his son expressed himself, and the quiet strength that radiated from the small figure in the seat. The sunlight continued to drift across the cabin, illuminating Ethan's careful movements, the polished surfaces of the seats, and the subtle gleam of the overhead compartments, painting a serene tableau that highlighted the connection between father and son, the calm authority of the boy, and the transformation of the cabin's energy. Megan finally returned to her duties with renewed composure, her steps quieter, more thoughtful, her attention mindful of Ethan's presence, recognizing the power of quiet resilience and dignity in a child, while the passengers' attention continued to be drawn in subtle ways to the boy who had shifted the entire atmosphere of the cabin with his composed actions. Ethan closed his small sketch carefully, sliding it back into his backpack, and leaned slightly to look at his father, a soft smile of contentment and understanding shared between them, the cabin filled with a calm anticipation, a gentle reminder of the unspoken connections, empathy, and respect that had quietly grown over the past minutes, leaving everyone in silent appreciation of the small boy whose presence had reshaped their view of courage, dignity, and human connection. Ethan Johnson glanced up from his backpack, his dark brown eyes scanning the cabin with quiet attentiveness, noting the subtle shifts in passengers' posture, the way their expressions softened as the hum of the engines created a steady, calming rhythm. Richard Johnson adjusted his seat slightly, leaning in just enough to rest a reassuring hand on Ethan's small shoulder, the gesture conveying support without intrusion, a silent affirmation that he was present and observant. Megan Parker moved down the aisle with measured steps, her hands arranging trays with careful precision, her gaze occasionally flicking toward Ethan, a mixture of reflection and newfound respect evident in the lines around her eyes. The sunlight streamed through the oval windows, painting the cabin with warm, golden highlights, glinting off polished metal and reflecting softly in the eyes of seated passengers who now watched Ethan with an attentive curiosity rather than judgment. Ethan carefully set his notebook aside, reaching into his backpack once more to pull out a small folded paper, and with deliberate calm, he handed it to a nearby child who had been quietly observing him, a gentle smile conveying reassurance and kindness without a word spoken. Richard observed the gesture, a soft smile crossing his own face as he recognized the boy's innate understanding of empathy and dignity, the ability to influence the environment with composure and quiet action rather than demand. Passengers whispered softly among themselves, some exchanging subtle nods, others leaning forward just slightly to witness the small but meaningful interactions, the cabin alive with silent appreciation for the boy's presence and the calm authority he exuded. Megan adjusted her stance near the front, breathing softly, her previous tension fully replaced by thoughtful observation, as if the moment had imparted a lesson on patience and the understated power of composure. Ethan lifted the small water bottle from his tray and took measured sips, his posture upright and controlled, a testament to his self-possession and careful attention to detail, each movement deliberate and graceful, reflecting an awareness of both his environment and the people within it. Richard bent slightly, his eyes tracking the boy's careful actions, a subtle nod of approval acknowledging Ethan's steady demeanor, his focus and mindfulness evident in every small gesture. The hum of the plane, the faint clatter of utensils, and the soft rustle of seatbelts punctuated the moment, creating a gentle, rhythmic backdrop that emphasized the calm and dignity radiating from Ethan. Outside the windows, the clouds drifted lazily across the sky, the sunlight shifting in slow, deliberate arcs that mirrored the quiet rhythm of the cabin, illuminating Ethan's composed form in a warm glow. Megan finally resumed her duties, moving with quiet assurance, her gestures careful, her attention mindful of the boy who had transformed the energy of the cabin simply. By maintaining dignity and empathy, while passengers continued to watch with subtle admiration, their expressions softened and thoughtful. Ethan placed the bottle back on the tray, glancing briefly at Richard with a small, appreciative smile, the silent communication between them conveying understanding, reassurance, and mutual respect. The cabin now filled with calm anticipation and the quiet sense that the moment's unfolding would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. The soft light continued to highlight the small gestures, the deliberate movements, and the attentive glances, creating a tableau of empathy, dignity, and subtle courage that lingered long after the immediate tension had dissipated. Ethan Johnson shifted slightly in his seat, dark brown eyes flicking toward the cabin windows as the sunlight traced patterns across the polished leather seats, the soft hum of the engines providing a steady, almost meditative rhythm. Richard Johnson leaned in just enough to rest a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, the gesture quiet but grounding, offering support without interrupting the boy's focus or independence. Megan Parker moved closer to the service card, her hands smoothing the edges of the trays, her gaze lingering on Ethan with a mixture of contemplation and newfound respect, each subtle movement revealing a gradual understanding of the quiet strength and dignity radiating from the small boy. Passengers shifted in their seats, leaning subtly forward, whispers fading into attentive silence, captivated by the calm and poise Ethan maintained even after the earlier tension. Ethan reached into his backpack and retrieved a small sketch, turning it carefully to show his father, lines of airplanes, clouds, and cityscapes drawn with meticulous care, a reflection of both observation and imagination, a testament to his focus and composure. Richard's eyes softened as he studied the drawings, a gentle smile acknowledging the thoughtfulness and steadiness of his son, understanding that these small gestures held more power than words. The sunlight streaming through the oval windows highlighted Ethan's careful movements, casting warm tones across his focused face and the neat lines of the sketch, while shadows from the overhead compartments and tray tables created a subtle depth that made every action more vivid and cinematic. Megan Parker adjusted her stance, the tension in her shoulders releasing further, her attention fully absorbed by the quiet lesson unfolding before her, recognizing the profound impact of patience, dignity, and composure in even the smallest actions. Ethan placed the sketch back in his backpack and looked up briefly, meeting Richard's gaze with a nod of understanding, the silent communication between them conveying trust, reassurance, and mutual respect. The passengers continued to watch, their expressions a blend of admiration and reflection, noticing how a small boy had transformed the atmosphere of the cabin with a balance of calm, empathy, and quiet authority. Ethan lifted his water bottle, took a measured sip, and placed it gently back on the tray, movements deliberate, almost ceremonious, each action reinforcing his composure and self-respect. Richard observed, nodding subtly, appreciating the boy's ability to command attention and respect without raising his voice or demanding recognition, his presence alone shaping the energy of the cabin. Outside the window, clouds drifted lazily past, sunlight refracting softly through them. The world in motion, yet the cabin seemed suspended in a calm, reflective moment. Megan Parker moved back toward the galley, her gestures careful, measured, and quiet, now mindful of Ethan's presence, understanding that the quiet courage and dignity of a child could influence even adults and transform the energy of the space around them. Ethan settled slightly in his seat, eyes sweeping the cabin with a serene awareness, posture upright and controlled, exuding a confidence that required no announcement, only presence. Richard continued to offer subtle support, his hand occasionally brushing against Ethan's shoulder, a grounding touch, while passengers absorbed the scene in silence, captivated by the quiet triumph of empathy, dignity, and the understated courage of a boy whose actions left a lasting impression. The soft glow of sunlight, the hum of engines, and the gentle interactions in the cabin combined into a tableau that felt timeless, a suspended moment of reflection, connection, and silent admiration that lingered in the eyes and minds of all who witnessed it, anticipation building quietly for the next chapter of the journey to unfold. Ethan Johnson felt a subtle shift in the cabin as the sunlight shifted across the leather seats, highlighting the soft curves of the aisle and the polished metal of the service carts. His dark brown eyes scanned the passengers briefly, noticing the faint smiles, the nods of subtle recognition, and the occasional glance of admiration directed toward him, all a quiet testament to the calm authority and composure he maintained without a single word. Richard Johnson leaned slightly closer, his hand brushing against Ethan's shoulder in a reassuring gesture, eyes meeting the boys with a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet courage displayed throughout the unfolding moments. Megan Parker moved toward the front of the cabin, her movements measured and deliberate, hands steady as she arranged the remaining service trays, the tension in her posture replaced by a reflective attentiveness, her eyes occasionally meeting Ethan's to gauge his response, and in each glance, she absorbed lessons of empathy, patience, and quiet dignity. The soft hum of the engines provided a steady, comforting rhythm as the plane maintained its course, the gentle vibration beneath the passengers' feet a subtle backdrop to the unfolding serenity, punctuated only by the soft clatter of cups and utensils from the galley and the quiet shuffle of passengers adjusting in their seats. Ethan shifted slightly, opening his backpack to retrieve a small sketch he had been working on, unfolding the carefully drawn pages to reveal clouds drifting past airplanes, cityscapes rendered in fine detail, and subtle representations of the cabin itself, each line deliberate and thoughtful, reflecting the boy's observant nature and composed mindset. Richard's gaze softened as he studied the drawings, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips as he recognized the focus, patience, and creative thought that Ethan poured into every detail, each stroke revealing a confidence and maturity beyond his years. The sunlight streamed through the windows in slanted beams, illuminating Ethan's careful movements, casting warm highlights across his features and the neat lines of his sketch, the cabin filled with an almost cinematic quality as shadows shifted subtly, emphasizing the quiet drama of the moment. Passengers observed discreetly, some leaning slightly forward, whispers replaced by attentive silence, their expressions reflecting a mixture of admiration and respect for the boy who had transformed the atmosphere of the plane with his calm, unwavering composure. Megan Parker straightened, shoulders relaxed, moving with quiet assurance, mindful of Ethan's presence, absorbing the impact of his dignity and subtle courage, her own demeanor transformed by the observation of the child's patience and grace. Ethan carefully returned the sketch to his backpack and adjusted the straps, sitting upright, his posture reflecting confidence, awareness, and the quiet control of the space around him. Richard nodded subtly, eyes conveying both pride and reassurance, his presence reinforcing the boy's quiet authority without overshadowing it. The cabin seemed to breathe as one, the soft light, gentle hum, and measured movements creating a tableau of empathy, reflection, and calm anticipation. Ethan lifted his water bottle again, taking small, measured sips, and placed it back with care, his actions deliberate and full of poise, capturing the attention of the passengers who now watched not just a small boy, but a figure of quiet resilience and dignity, leaving a lingering sense of respect and anticipation for what would come next as the plane continued its steady flight across the sky. Ethan Johnson felt the soft hum of the engines beneath him as a steady backdrop, each vibration matching the slow rhythm of his calm breathing. The sunlight through the oval windows casting golden streaks across the polished cabin and illuminating his focused expression. Richard Johnson remained beside him, a reassuring presence, his hand occasionally brushing Ethan's shoulder in subtle support, eyes alert to every glance and movement in the surrounding cabin. Megan Parker moved deliberately along the aisle, arranging remaining service trays with precise care, her gaze occasionally flicking toward Ethan, absorbing the lessons of quiet dignity and composure radiating from the small boy. Passengers leaned slightly forward in their seats, whispers softened to attentive silence, their expressions shifting to admiration and reflection as they observed how Ethan carried himself with quiet authority, turning what could have been discomfort into a moment of understated grace. Ethan retrieved a small sketch from his backpack, unfolding it carefully to reveal detailed airplanes, flowing clouds, and subtle sketches of the cabin interior, each line executed with steady hands and meticulous attention, reflecting his observant mind and calm control of his surroundings. Richard's lips curved in a subtle smile as he studied the sketches, recognizing the patience, focus, and creativity embodied in every stroke, each movement a testament to the boy's quiet confidence and resilience. The sunlight moved across the cabin in slow, deliberate arcs, casting shadows that emphasized the serene drama of the moment, the glinting metal of the service carts reflecting the soft light and lending a cinematic quality to the scene. Megan Parker straightened slightly, her own tension easing as she observed Ethan's composed presence, recognizing the impact of empathy, patience, and understated courage, and her movements softened, deliberate and thoughtful as she resumed her tasks. Ethan carefully placed the sketch back into his backpack and shifted slightly, scanning the cabin with attentive, calm eyes, nodding briefly to passengers who met his gaze. A silent gesture of connection and reassurance. Richard acknowledged the gesture with a soft nod, maintaining a protective yet unobtrusive presence, reinforcing the boy's confidence without overshadowing it. The cabin was quiet, the soft hum of the engines, occasional rustle of seatbelts, and muted clatter of utensils creating a rhythmic backdrop to the unfolding tableau of dignity and composure. Outside, the clouds drifted lazily past, sunlight glinting off their edges, mirroring the gentle, controlled movements of the boy inside the cabin. Ethan lifted his water bottle with careful precision, taking a slow, deliberate sip, his posture erect, his expression calm yet alert, commanding respect without a word, a subtle reminder of his quiet strength. Richard observed each gesture, eyes reflecting pride and reassurance, recognizing how Ethan's calm authority had transformed the energy of the cabin and captured the attention and respect of everyone present. Megan Parker, moving toward the galley, continued to adjust trays and supplies with careful attention, mindful of the lessons she had absorbed from Ethan's poise, while passengers watched in quiet admiration, their expressions softening, some exchanging subtle glances that acknowledged the boy's impact. Ethan placed the water bottle back on the tray gently, shifting in his seat to sit fully upright, dark brown eyes sweeping the cabin in calm, deliberate observation, radiating empathy, dignity, and the understated courage that had quietly reshaped the atmosphere and left an indelible impression on all who witnessed it, the anticipation for what might unfold next lingering like a gentle hum throughout the cabin. Ethan Johnson carefully adjusted his seat, glancing out the oval window as the soft light of the afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the cabin, illuminating his small, composed figure with warmth and clarity. Richard Johnson remained close, his hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, the subtle contact reinforcing a quiet sense of security and trust, a silent communication that spoke volumes more than words could convey. Megan Parker moved with deliberate steps toward the front of the plane, her hands arranging remaining service trays with precise care, eyes flicking toward Ethan as though studying every nuance of his calm demeanor, each gesture reflecting the growing admiration she felt for his composed presence. Passengers shifted slightly in their seats, whispers fading to attentive silence as they observe the boy, his poise and self-assuredness quietly commanding respect throughout the cabin. Ethan retrieved his small sketchbook from his backpack. Once more, opening it to a blank page and beginning to draw with measured, deliberate strokes, capturing the curvature of the plane, the drifting clouds outside, and tiny details of the interior, each line reflecting focus, creativity, and the quiet confidence that had captivated the entire cabin. Richard glanced over, eyes softening, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he noted the precision, patience, and thoughtfulness in every line Ethan drew, recognizing the subtle strength and maturity radiating from his son. Sunlight continued to drift across the cabin, glinting off metal surfaces and casting long, warm shadows that accentuated the cinematic quality of the moment, highlighting the careful, deliberate movements of Ethan's hands and the serene attentiveness in his expression. Megan Parker straightened, her shoulders easing, her earlier tension replaced by contemplation, her gaze lingering on the boy who had turned a moment of tension into one of respect, empathy, and quiet admiration. Ethan paused in his drawing, looking up briefly to meet the eyes of a young passenger a few rows away, offering a subtle nod and a gentle smile that communicated understanding and reassurance without a word, the kind of small gesture that reverberated throughout the cabin. Richard mirrored the gesture with a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of the connection and trust between father and son, reinforcing the boy's quiet authority and composure. The cabin's energy shifted further, the hum of the engines, the faint rustle of seatbelts, and the occasional clink of cups creating a gentle rhythm that underscored the moment, emphasizing the calm, poised environment that Ethan had cultivated with his presence alone. Passengers continued to watch, some leaning slightly forward, others exchanging discreet glances that conveyed admiration, all drawn in by the quiet dignity and resilience of the small boy. Ethan carefully placed the sketchbook back into his backpack, adjusted his posture, and looked toward his father, a soft, contented smile crossing his lips, the unspoken understanding and mutual respect between them palpable in the warm light. Richard's gaze remained steady, eyes reflecting pride and reassurance, recognizing how Ethan's patience, empathy, and composure had transformed the cabin, leaving every passenger quietly aware of the subtle power of dignity and courage. Outside, the clouds continued to drift past, sunlight refracting in soft, shifting patterns that mirrored the calm and focus within the cabin, emphasizing the quiet triumph and gentle anticipation of what would unfold. Next, a moment suspended in time, yet filled with unspoken connection and admiration. Ethan Johnson adjusted slightly in his seat, dark brown eyes sweeping the cabin with calm attentiveness, noticing subtle glances of admiration from nearby passengers, their expressions softening as the tension of earlier moments dissolved into quiet respect. Richard Johnson remained at his side, hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, his presence steady and reassuring, a silent communication of support and trust that reinforced the boy's composed demeanor. Megan Parker moved with deliberate care along the aisle, arranging remaining service trays and checking for neatness, her posture eased, shoulders relaxed, eyes occasionally flicking toward Ethan with a mixture of reflection and newfound respect. The hum of the engines created a steady, rhythmic backdrop, punctuated by the soft clatter of utensils and the gentle rustle of seatbelts, framing the calm energy of the cabin in a serene, almost cinematic atmosphere. Ethan reached into his backpack to retrieve a small folded drawing, carefully presenting it to Richard, the lines depicting airplanes, clouds, and subtle sketches of the cabin interior, each stroke deliberate and precise, reflecting observation, creativity, and quiet focus. Richard's gaze softened, a faint smile appearing as he studied the sketch, acknowledging the patience and thoughtful care evident in every line, a reflection of the boy's inner strength and quiet maturity. The sunlight streaming through the cabin windows highlighted Ethan's careful movements, glinting off the metal edges of trays and the polished surfaces of the seats, casting warm tones that accentuated the calm yet deliberate rhythm of his actions. Passengers leaned slightly forward in their seats, observing silently, their whispers replaced by attentive stillness, captivated by the composed presence and dignity radiating from Ethan. Megan Parker adjusted her stance, letting her shoulders fall as she absorbed the lesson of humility, respect, and subtle courage being displayed, her movements now deliberate and thoughtful, mindful of the influence a child could have simply through composed action. Ethan carefully returned the drawing to his backpack, shifting in his seat with deliberate grace, eyes meeting his father's in a soft, silent exchange of understanding, trust, and quiet pride. Richard nodded subtly, a reassuring smile confirming the mutual respect and connection between them, reinforcing Ethan's quiet authority without diminishing his independence. The cabin's energy settled fully, the hum of the engines and gentle background noises providing a steady rhythm, while outside the window, clouds drifted in soft, golden light, mirroring the serene atmosphere inside. Ethan lifted his water bottle for a measured sip, placing it back with care, each small movement deliberate, full of poise and controlled presence, reinforcing the subtle respect he commanded from all in the cabin. Richard observed, eyes reflecting pride and quiet reassurance, noting how Ethan's calm, confident composure had reshaped the energy around him, turning previous tension into reflective admiration and quiet anticipation. Passengers continued to watch, some exchanging subtle nods or glances, their expressions a mixture of awe, admiration, and quiet reflection, the boy's dignity leaving an indelible impression. Megan Parker moved back toward the galley with measured steps, careful not to disturb the calm atmosphere, her actions now reflective of the lesson observed in Ethan's poise, patience, and empathy. Ethan leaned slightly forward, dark brown eyes scanning the cabin with calm awareness, posture upright, exuding quiet confidence, his presence radiating dignity and courage. The energy of the cabin transformed, leaving passengers and crew alike with a lingering sense of respect and the anticipation of what might follow as the flight continued, the moment suspended in a balance of serenity, empathy, and subtle anticipation. Ethan Johnson sat upright, the cabin bathed in the warm afternoon light filtering through the oval windows, his small hands resting calmly on his lap as his dark brown eyes followed the gentle drift of clouds outside. Richard Johnson remained close, his hand occasionally brushing Ethan's shoulder in quiet support, a subtle reminder that he was present and protective without imposing, allowing his son the space to carry himself with poise. Megan Parker moved down the aisle, her hands adjusting the service trays with deliberate care, her eyes glancing toward Ethan repeatedly, each time absorbing the quiet authority and dignity the boy exuded, a lesson in empathy and composure she could not ignore. Passengers shifted in their seats, some leaning slightly forward, whispers fading into thoughtful silence as they watched the small boy maintain his calm and controlled presence, the cabin alive with a quiet reverence for the courage and integrity he displayed without a word. Ethan reached into his backpack, retrieving a neatly folded sketch, and with careful precision, he showed it to Richard, the drawings depicting clouds, airplanes, and subtle details of the cabin interior, each line deliberate and reflective of his focused observation and composed nature. Richard's lips curved into a soft smile as he studied the sketches, recognizing the meticulous care, patience, and subtle confidence conveyed through each stroke, a testament to the quiet strength and maturity of his son. Sunlight continued to drift across the cabin, casting warm highlights on Ethan's features and the polished surfaces around him, shadows stretching in gentle arcs that added depth to the serene, almost cinematic atmosphere of the moment. Megan Parker adjusted her stance, shoulders easing as she took in the scene, her attention fully absorbed by the lessons in dignity, calm authority, and subtle influence that Ethan demonstrated through quiet action. Ethan carefully returned the sketch to his backpack, shifting slightly to sit upright, posture precise, eyes sweeping the cabin with calm awareness, silently acknowledging the passenger's attention and the subtle respect he had earned. Richard nodded gently, a quiet affirmation of understanding and pride, his presence reinforcing Ethan's composure and the careful balance of guidance and autonomy he offered. The hum of the engines, the gentle rustle of seatbelts, and occasional clink of utensils created a rhythmic backdrop, emphasizing the calm and reflective energy that now filled the cabin. Outside, clouds drifted lazily past, sunlight refracting in gentle, shifting patterns, mirroring the quiet order and attentiveness within. Ethan lifted his water bottle in deliberate motion, taking a measured sip and placing it back with care, each movement deliberate and graceful, radiating composure, awareness, and subtle strength. Richard's gaze followed each action, pride evident as he observed how his son's presence had transformed the cabin, turning previous tension into admiration, reflection, and quiet anticipation. Megan resumed her duties with thoughtful precision, mindful of Ethan's presence and the impact of his actions, her gestures deliberate, her posture softening. Ethan leaned slightly forward, dark brown